Dr. Phil McGraw thought he knew everything about human behavior. Decades on television, millions of books sold, the go-to guy for everyone else's problems. But nothing in his extensive playbook on life, love, and loss had prepared him for the moment he'd spot his ex-wife Robin at Spago in Beverly Hills, guiding two little boys who had his piercing blue eyes, his distinctive nose, and the same determined set of his jaw. The man who never hesitated, who always had the answer, was about to learn that some truths defy all logic and some reckonings are more profound than any televised therapy session. Dr. Phil sat at a secluded corner table, the low hum of the upscale restaurant, a familiar backdrop. December 15th, 2023, 7:15 p.m. He'd just wrapped a week of intense shows and wanted nothing more than a quiet steak and a glass of Cabernet. He wore a tailored black suit, no tie, an attempt at casual that did little to disguise his famous bald head and imposing stature. At 73, he was still instantly recognizable. A woman at a nearby table had already done a double take, whispering excitedly to her husband. Phil had given a curt nod, a silent request for privacy he knew was rarely granted. He just wanted to be Phil McGraw tonight, not the larger-than-life Dr. Phil. The restaurant buzzed with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of expensive conversations. Hollywood agents brokered deals over appetizers. Couples on first dates navigated awkward silences. A family celebrated a birthday with a discreetly presented cake. Phil had seen this scene 1,000 times. Nothing surprised him anymore, until he heard that laugh. It was a sound etched into his memory, a light, musical laugh that could fill a room. His head snapped up, his gaze sweeping across the sea of diners. And then he saw her. Standing near the hostess stand, about 50 feet away, was a woman he hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. Robin McGraw, his wife of nearly half a century, the silent partner to his on-screen empire. But it wasn't just seeing Robin that made the air leave his lungs. It was the two small boys standing on either side of her, their hands clutching hers. Twin boys, he registered, who looked to be about 4 years old. They had the same sandy brown hair he'd had as a boy, the same inquisitive eyes that missed nothing. His fork, laden with a piece of filet mignon, slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the fine china. The sound was a gunshot in the otherwise controlled ambiance of the room. "Sir, are you all right?" A waiter materialized at his side, his face a mask of professional concern. "Fine," Phil managed to croak. But his eyes were locked on the twins. One of the boys wore a miniature Dallas Cowboys jersey, the other a simple polo shirt. When the second boy turned to look at a passing dessert cart, Phil saw it clearly, the same slight furrow in his brow that Phil saw in his own reflection when he was deep in thought. "Mommy, can we have the chocolate cake?" one of the twins asked, his voice clear and confident. "We'll see, sweetie. Let's get to our table first," Robin replied, her voice calm and steady, the same voice that had soothed him after countless stressful show tapings. The boy's voice. It had the same cadence as his own son Jay's at that age. Phil's chest tightened. The bustling restaurant faded into a dull roar as he focused entirely on those two little faces. "But David said we could have cake," the second twin insisted, his tone reasonable but firm. David. The word struck Phil like a physical blow. Who was David? Where was their father? Robin looked up then, her eyes scanning the room as if sensing his stare. They locked. Her face, usually composed and camera-ready, went completely pale for a moment that stretched into an eternity. They just stared at each other across the crowded restaurant. It was 1976 again, and they were just two kids from Texas, dreaming of a future they couldn't possibly have imagined. A future before the fame, before the brand, before everything had become so impossibly complicated. But this wasn't 1976. This was now, and there were two little boys holding her hands who had his eyes, his brow, and his unmistakable air of quiet authority. The twins, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding, began a quiet debate over whether chocolate or strawberry was the superior cake flavor. "Jaden, you always want chocolate," one said. Jaden, his own son, was named Jay. "Well, you always want strawberry, Jordan," the other retorted. Jordan, his own middle name. Phil took a shaky breath, his mind a whirlwind of questions he was terrified to ask, of answers he knew he couldn't handle. Who were these boys? When were they born? Why did seeing them feel like a verdict on a life he thought he had all figured out? Around him, the restaurant continued its elegant dance. Waiters delivered plates with a flourish. Wine was poured. Laughter erupted from a nearby table. But Dr. Phil, the man who had built an empire on having all the answers, stood utterly frozen. Frozen by two little boys who looked just like him. The sight of Robin and those twins sent Phil's mind hurtling back in time. Standing in that polished restaurant, he was suddenly a young man again, sitting in a dusty courtroom in Wichita Falls, Texas. In 1976, he was a struggling PhD student, and she was the beautiful girl who had agreed to a second date even after he'd spent the first one talking about psychology theories. He'd spotted her across the room during a break in a trial he was observing. She had a smile that could disarm a hostile witness. "You're not going to try and analyze me, are you?" had been one of the first things she'd said to him. "Only if you want me to." He'd shot back with a confidence he didn't feel. That was Robin. Smart, funny, and completely unfazed by his academic ambitions. She saw the man, not the credentials. She made him laugh. She challenged his assumptions. She made him believe he could do anything. They married that same year. A simple ceremony. He remembered how she'd squeezed his hand and whispered, "Just promise me, we'll always be a team." "Always," he'd said. And in that moment, he'd meant it with every fiber of his being. Their son Jay was born in 1979. Phil remembered holding him for the first time, a tiny, perfect bundle, and feeling a sense of purpose that no textbook could provide. Then came the years of building his practice, the long hours, the financial struggles. Robin was his rock, managing their home, raising their son, and always believing in him. Those early years were a blur of hard work and simple joys. Sunday barbecues, Jay's Little League games, quiet evenings when they would talk for hours about their dreams. He remembered one afternoon, watching a 5-year-old Jay trying to explain a playground dispute with solemn 5-year-old logic. "He's got your brain," Robin had said, beaming, "and your heart," Phil had replied, pulling her close. Then everything changed. The Oprah Winfrey Show, the Dr. Phil Show. He wasn't just a psychologist anymore. He was a phenomenon, a brand. The demands were relentless. Taping schedules, book tours, media appearances. He was never home. He remembered a fight they'd had after the first season of his show became a runaway hit. He'd come home at midnight buzzing with adrenaline, to find her sitting in the dark in their living room. "What's wrong?" he'd asked, genuinely baffled. He was at the top of his game. This was their dream, wasn't it? "I feel like I'm married to a television set," she'd whispered, her voice raw. "You're never here, Phil. And even when you are, your mind is on the next show, the next rating, the next crisis you have to solve for a stranger." "This is what we worked for, Robin," he'd argued, sitting beside her. "This is for us, for our family." "No, Phil. This was your dream. My dream was a husband who came home for dinner." The stories started after that. Rumors of marital trouble, fueled by their increasingly separate lives. He was Dr. Phil, America's straight-talking therapist. She was the silent, smiling wife in the front row of his audience. A prop. He knew she hated it, but the machine was too big to stop. He was trapped in the persona he had created. He missed Jay's college football games. He missed birthdays and anniversaries. He was solving the problems of the world while his own family fell apart in silence. "You're missing his whole life, Phil," Robin had said during one of their last desperate conversations about Jay. I'm providing for this family, he'd shot back, the words tasting like ash. Everything I do is for you and Jay. We don't need more money, Phil. We just needed you. The divorce was finalized in early 2021. It was quiet, civil, handled by expensive lawyers. Robin got the house, a generous settlement, and her freedom. Jay, a grown man with his own life, was caught in the middle, loving them both, disappointed in them both. Phil shook his head, the restaurant's ambient noise rushing back. His eyes were still locked on those two little boys. They were now examining the dessert cart with intense focus, their small hands gesturing as they debated. One of them dropped a small, silver toy car. It rolled silently across the plush carpet, coming to a stop just inches from Phil's expensive Italian shoe. Robin was walking toward him now, her expression unreadable. She was trying to look calm, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands. One of the twins pointed a small finger at Phil. "Mommy, that man has my car." "I see that, sweetie," Robin said, her voice tight. Phil bent down, his movements stiff, and picked up the toy. It was a miniature Aston Martin, the kind James Bond drove. Up close, the resemblance of the boys was even more staggering. They didn't just look like him. They had his mannerisms, the way they stood, feet slightly apart, as if ready to take on the world, the intense, focused stare. "Hello, Robin," Phil said, his voice hoarse. She looked up, and he saw the unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "Phil." The twins stared at him, their blue eyes wide with curiosity. They were beautiful children, a perfect blend of him and Robin. "This is yours, I believe," Phil said, holding out the toy car. "Thank you, sir," said the boy in the Cowboys jersey, taking it with a polite nod. "Are you famous? You look like the man on Grandma's TV." Phil's heart hammered against his ribs. "Where is your father?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. "He's in heaven," the other twin said, his voice clear and matter-of-fact, the way only a child can deliver devastating news. "Mommy says he was a hero." Phil's world tilted on its axis. He looked at Robin, his eyes pleading for an explanation. She closed her eyes for a brief second, gathering her strength. "Phil," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "we need to talk. Privately."